U.S. President Joe Biden expressed his commitment to advancing a Pacific Trade Pact during a summit of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum in San Francisco. Despite facing challenges in strengthening workers' rights, Biden stated that the work is not yet done and that the administration will continue to work towards facilitating high-standard trade that promotes workers' rights through strong enforcement of labor standards. In addition to the APEC summit, Biden also participated in an event for the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, a 14-nation group established by his administration. However, hopes for an IPEF trade deal were dashed as members could not reach an agreement on improving labor and environmental standards or compliance. Deputy U.S. Trade Representative Sarah Bianchi stated that the U.S. and its Indo-Pacific partners need to regroup and recalibrate their trade negotiations early next year. While most negotiations take years, the White House intends to work on an accelerated timeline. The establishment of the IPEF by the White House aimed to strengthen economic engagement with Asia after former President Donald Trump withdrew from a regional trade pact in 2017. The upcoming presidential election, where Biden could potentially face Trump again, may impact U.S. support for multilateral groups like APEC or the IMF and trade policy. During the summit, Biden announced several agreements, including a supply chain agreement to identify bottlenecks, agreements to accelerate clean energy transitions, and an agreement to combat corruption. He also highlighted the launch of an investment accelerator to attract private capital for investments in clean energy and technology. Biden emphasized that continued U.S. economic growth would benefit the entire world, although the global economy remains sluggish. The International Monetary Fund recently lowered its growth forecasts for China and stated that global growth remained low and uneven. Biden noted that 60% of U.S. exports go to APEC countries, and American businesses are the largest source of foreign direct investment in those economies, committing at least $40 billion in 2023. U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo confirmed that IPEF countries had agreed on several pillars of the trade initiative, including cooperation on clean energy and anti-corruption measures. Ministers also signed a previously agreed text of a third pillar, covering supply chain resiliency. While the U.S.-backed initiative is not the only trade agreement in the region, trade ministers from the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership countries expressed openness to welcoming new members if they meet the bloc standards. APEC members have been closely monitoring the relationship between the U.S. and China, the world's two largest economies and strategic rivals. There are concerns that increased competition between the two could disrupt global trade and security. Following a summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping aimed at improving relations, Biden emphasized the importance of a stable relationship between the U.S. and China for the world. He stated that the United States remains engaged in the Pacific region and is not decoupling its economy from China but rather de-risking and diversifying. Overall, Biden's participation in the APEC summit and the IPEF event highlighted the administration's commitment to advancing trade and economic engagement in the Asia-Pacific region while addressing concerns related to workers' rights and environmental standards.